The objective of this lesson is to analyze data on a dot plot using context and distribution. Line plots and dot plots are interchangeable terms for the same type of graph. Graphs are tools used by statisticians to analyze data. Line plots and dot plots may show the data using a dot or an X over a number line. Dot plots or line plots show the frequency of a smaller number of data points. Data on a graph can provide information at a glance for larger amounts of data. Noticing the shape and distribution of the data in context of what the data represents can provide additional information. We should also look to see if the data is skewed. Skew is the measure of asymmetrical shape of data. Graphs with skewness will have outliers or data trailing in one direction or the other. The trail of data skews the mean. If the data has outliers on the left, then the data is skewed to the left or the mean is skewed to the left. Let's examine the following dot plot. This dot plot shows the percent correct on a test for a number of students. Titles and labels are important on a graph because they provide context for the data. Without context, the data is meaningless. This graph shows that most of the students scored above 70% on the test. A cluster is a group of data occurring close together on a graph. The most common score or highest peak on the graph was 95%. Gaps are places on a graph where data values are not present. There is a gap on this graph between 35% and 70%. The gap tells us the data or the mean will be skewed to the left. There were only 2 students who earned a percent below 35% correct on the test. A teacher looking at this graph and understanding the context might determine that the majority of the students in her class understood the concept. Let's look at another line plot. From the title, we can see this line plot shows reading minutes completed. The dots represent the percent of reading minutes completed by each student. The cluster on this graph can be found from 0 to 35%. There are few gaps on the line plot as well. Only one student has completed 100% of the reading minutes. The gaps in the data will skew the data or the mean to the right. The most common percent or peak on the graph is 5% because that is the percent with the most dots. A teacher looking at this graph and understanding the context might determine that the majority of the students still need to complete or turn in their reading minutes. Let's look at one more dot plot. This dot plot shows the candy bar prices in cents. This graph has a cluster in the data from 40 cents to 75 cents. There are a few gaps on this graph to the left and a few more gaps on the right. Although there is 1 or 2 more data points on the right, but none are very significant, the data may be slightly skewed to the right. The most common price or peak on the graph is 55 cents. In summary, let's examine all 3 dot plots. The look of data can often reveal trends or lack of trends. Each of the displayed graphs has a unique shape. Shape is the overall look of the data. This attribute can often reveal a trend that can support future predictions. A graph is symmetrical if the data looks like a bell. This is also known as a bell curve. The candy bar prices graph is an example of symmetrical data. Skew describes data clustered at one end and trailing in the opposite direction. This is visible when data is clustered at either extreme of the number line with a tail traveling in the direction of the skew. The term skew comes from outlying data that skews the mean. The test scores graph depicts a skew to the left, and the reading minutes graph depicts a skew to the right. The objective for this lesson was to analyze data on a dot plot using context and distribution. We met this objective by analyzing dot plots and looking at the overall shape of the data.